What time is it? It's time for another every other Wednesday.
Let's just fill it. So I recently discovered that I do a really good impersonation. This is my impersonation of Jeff Goldblum.
Oh my gosh.
Thank you. I will be offering autographs.
Brilliant, brilliant. So my question for you, Sanjay, is how did you discover this? How did you stumble upon this little discovery?
So if you must know, see, Maria, I appreciate it. Thank you. If you must know, one of my best friends is an optometrist, and I'm getting old, so I went and saw him, and he said my near vision is starting to go a bit. He goes, "You don't need glasses yet." He goes, "But if you want to go to the dollar store and get 1.25, you'll be good to go." So I was like, all right, and I got them. And just before I got on the call, they were on my head because apparently I can read my cell phone and my watch better when I'm wearing it. And so they kind of fell on my face, and I was like, oh my God, that looks like Jeff. So the end.
So the secret is out. Sanjay is over 40.
Yes.
And there you go.
Yeah.
By the way, Hungry Like the Wolf is our new theme today, just because it's what? Duran Duran Appreciation Day or something?
It's Duran Duran Appreciation Day.
Got
All
it.
right.
Got
Well,
it.
why don't we
yeah.
go ahead and get this party started? And you know what that means. So the first order of business is this. Everyone get ready.
What time is it? It's time for another every other Wednesday.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everyone, to Every Other Wednesday. It is August the 10th, 2022. And I'm going to introduce myself in just a little bit, but I'm going to ask one of my friends and colleagues here to get this party started.
I'll start. Because it's so unusual that I'm here, I'm so excited. And as most of you, many of you know, who regular viewers of the show, I had an adventure over the last 2 weeks in the Yukon Territory, 10-day rafting trip. We almost survived unscathed, especially when that grizzly bear, true story, was snorting about 10 feet from my head when we were in the tent one night. Apparently they're more interested in berries than in any toads. So we survived that, but unfortunately, my wife during a hike was in some mud and got stuck, and she fell over and she broke her ankle. So I am now a servant in our house for anything that she needs.
Sorry, how is that different from before?
No, you're right. We'll talk offline. It's another topic for another day. Michael.
Hey, Michael Kerr here, coming to you as always from beautiful Canmore, Alberta, in the Canadian Rockies, in the heart of grizzly country. We had, like in June, we had something like 13 grizzly bears roaming around the town of Canmore. It was insane, Jeff. So you should have been here then.
Yeah.
I, of course, speak and write about inspiring workplaces and humor at work. And over to you, Mr. Sanjay / Jeff Goldblum.
I am the illegitimate son of Jeff Goldblum, but you can call me Sanjay. I am based in Toronto, Ontario, and I speak on performance and leadership. Mr. Haddon.
Wait, before you introduce yourself, may I just say to Jerry Gitchell, make sure you change from host and panelists to everyone so that your messages can be seen by everyone.
I already said this.
I know, but he didn't do it. So.
He may not have heard it. He may not. So anyway, well, good. Thank you, everyone. I am Richard Haddon, and I'm coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida, as I do every time that I'm here at home in my office. And I speak on employee engagement, leadership, and a lot lately on retention and recruitment. And speaking of mud and getting feet,
That was such a good segue.
in the mud, I know. I'm going to introduce to you our guest and my friend, Jason Mudd with 2 Ds. And that makes him special and not the same kind of mud that Judy Tobe injured her ankle on. Jason Mudd lives in and works in Amelia Island, Florida, which some of you may know is a resort area just north of Jacksonville. Jason and I have been friends for, 20, 25 years, Jason.
That's right.
Jason hired me to speak a long time ago for an association, and in spite of that, we have remained friends. Jason is the founder and managing partner of a company called Axia Public Relations, Axia PR. It's AXIA. And you may not have heard of them, but Forbes magazine has, because Forbes magazine has named Axia PR one of America's best PR agencies. Now, as you know, public relations requires a real human, personal touch, but not only is Jason high touch, he's very high tech and is one of the most technologically advanced PR professionals going. And in 2007, Jason started podcasting. And you're saying, wait a minute, was podcasting even a thing in 2007? And apparently it was. Jason is now host and producer of the podcast On Top of PR with Jason Mudd. It's a very popular podcast. And he also writes articles for the American business journals. And many of you in your cities in the US will have an American City Business Journal. So what we're here to talk with Jason about is a little bit about his company and primarily about the culture that he has built, developed, and nurtured through the years at his company. And I think we can learn a lot from that discussion. So welcome, Jason Mudd.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Thank you. It's awesome to hear you introduce me, since I've introduced you to so many times that not only have I hired you to speak, but I keep hiring you to come back and you keep showing up and doing a great job. So thank you for that.
Thank
Really
you.
I have to ask, Jason, do you not learn from your mistakes? Why did you hire Richard back?
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, hiring him once, I think we can all see that, right?
Well,
So
Richard just keeps over delivering. What can I say?
Well,
So,
oh
there we
gosh,
go.
thank you. You know, and Jason, you may have already picked up on this, but a lot of what we do here is insult each other. And
Apparently.
what you have just done is just the opposite. So I really
Pretty much mostly what we do here.
yeah, I appreciate the fresh approach.
Forget about getting invited back, I guess, because
This
you know I've
this
got
is
to
the
throw
culture
more
we
jabs.
create.
Yeah.
The culture we
Jason,
create,
tell us-
high insults, low
Okay,
sensitivity.
folks, you know, we only have 45 minutes and we've only got 38 of those minutes left. So we better get going. Jason, tell us a little bit about Axia PR.
All right, so Axia PR is a PR agency. We work with mid-market and enterprise brands, as well as some startup and you know, emerging companies. We help companies manage their news, social, and web. So getting them in the news, helping their executives get out there and speak, helping the company win awards, helping them improve their social media engagement, including like Reddit and Quora, as well as their user-generated content like Wikipedia and other type forums, and then obviously helping them optimize their website to not only attract more traffic, but to capture more traffic and get them interested in you know, exploring and making decisions to perhaps purchase or support the organization itself.
Cool. Cool.
And how big is the organization?
So, you know, we're about 20 colleagues across North America. In the current environment, not all of those people are going to be W-2 workers, just based on our needs and stuff. But that's about our organization right now. We have gone, you know, we were letting people, not to get ahead of ourselves, we were letting people work from home, you know, already 3 or 4, even 5 days a week before the pandemic. So when the pandemic hit, we actually gave away some of our geographic branch offices. And have never really looked back because we were pretty well prepared for that. And COVID was just the kick we needed just to go fully virtual. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about our company.
And to take the wind out of Richard's sails. Sorry, I'm still in Canberra.
You're still in Yukon.
Yukon, where was I? Probably taking the wind out of yourselves. I read in the material that we had that you went 63 months without any turnover and no layoffs during the pandemic. For that, I just want to say, wow, that's amazing.
Thanks.
Why, so why? Let's ask
Yeah.
about that. I mean, why do you think there's not? Why did you think you went 63 months, 5 years plus, without any turnover? And I'll stir the pot a little bit by saying some people have said, I'm not sure that I necessarily agree with this, but I've heard people say that zero turnover is not necessarily the goal of an organization. But I want to hear about it from your perspective, Jason.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. So lots of things I think we could explore there. Let me just start off with a confession that when I started, before I met Richard, I really didn't have a whole lot of value in culture. I thought culture was kind of something that people talked about for warm and fuzzy, but it really wasn't meaningful to me in my business. And the truth is, I think that's because I had worked at companies where culture was not great, right? And so I just thought that was a soft skill that people like to talk about, but I was more hard driving and business generating, you know, focused on business. Part of that's my personality type. My natural instinct is to be task focused and not people focused. So I ran my business that way. But then I'm always a student of learning and a student of leadership. And in that process, I've become a student of culture and realizing how important it is. So I look back at the culture we had 20 something years ago, and I'm embarrassed by it. But as we started growing and just, I started becoming my own entrepreneur, I really saw how important culture was. Part of that, honestly, was giving birth to, or my wife giving birth, of course, to our first child, a daughter, and just seeing how she was motivated by the culture we were creating for her at home, and motivated by the nurturing and loving and supportive and encouragement that we gave her. So that really started speaking to me about, the company environment we had. So earlier we were joking around about picking on each other. Well, my background a little bit was in coaching. And so I was coaching people. I was treating people like a coach and pushing them harder and harder and harder. And if I'm being candid, in a mostly female dominated industry, that fell flat on its face. And so I want to open up to more questions, but to your other question you asked, Richard, we went 63 months without any turnover. I would tell you that bragging point allowed me to allow us to keep people around longer than we should have. And when one person was kind of given notice, like, hey, here's 90 days notice, we need to improve these things, or else we're not going to be able to retain your employment here. When that happened, we also asked a couple other people to leave, and one person decided to leave on their own. And so we had quite a bit of turnover at that moment. And I knew leading up to it, that I was more interested in bragging about our streak of turnover than I was about running the highest performing, highest optimized organization. And if I'm being even more confessional here, it was really bad for our culture to hold on to those people.
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Very,
really
yeah,
good point.
that's fascinating, and people do sometimes miss that point, I think. So thank you, Jason. So Jason, you talked about having obviously this journey, or this epiphany, where you realized culture is king. You need to focus on your culture. A question we get all the time is, where do you start with culture, right? So when you had this notion that, boy, we've got to place more emphasis on your culture, what were some of the first things you did to make that a realization?
So I think I'm going to pivot with your question like a good politician would, and I would say I'd rather answer what I would do all over again if I had to start over, knowing what I know now. I think that'd be more helpful to your audience, and that would be.
Actually, sorry, Jason, if you don't mind, if you were to start all over again, what would you do differently?
I was just going to ask that.
I would do a cultural assessment, which we had never done before until we started building a good culture. The numbers might not be perfect, but off the cuff, when we first did one, this was actually after improving our culture, we came back with the culture score of 63. And then we measured it kind of annually until we got to a point where we were, once we got to 80 something, our consultant said, hey, 80 is good enough. You shouldn't strive to be any more than 80. And I'm like, I see why you say that, but I want to keep going. And so when we started creeping towards the high 90s, that's when I was like, okay, this is where I want to be. This feels like home to me. Because you're always going to have some detractors, or if everybody's giving you a perfect score, then it's meaningless what the data shows and what it comes back to you for. So I would start off with a culture score, so you know where you are and you can measure that you're genuinely improving it. And I think people care that you're asking them, to give you feedback, but then they care that you're checking up on it and you're seeking to constantly improve it. So that's where I would start.
Jason, what instrument are you using to measure, if you don't mind sharing? Because I'm sure people are going to ask.
Yeah, so we work with a company called 3-Phase Business Advisors. They're local to Northeast Florida, but they work in other markets as well. And so they developed a culture score. There are other organizations that have very similar, if not the same culture score mechanism available, but it's basically like an online questionnaire that you email out to your team. They click a link, they fill it out. I believe you can change however you want it set, but I'm pretty sure we set ours to be completely anonymous. I think you can do other identifiers like department and even have them give you their name. But for us, we wanted to keep it as raw and real as possible. And I don't even think I allowed myself to see the individual feedback, so I could start kind of taking guesses who might have said what, versus having it all compiled and then, getting some highlights reported back from our consultant.
Okay, so you established that culture is important. You wanted to shift the culture. So what are some of the things you're doing? I mean, you mentioned you had very low turnover. What is it you guys are doing? Are you sitting and singing Kumbaya? Are you praying in the corner, hoping things get better? What are some of the tactical things that you engaged in?
Well, first of all, the buck starts and ends with leadership, right? And so in my small business, I'm the primary leader of the organization. I'm the entrepreneur behind the brand. And so the first thing I had to do was, number one, convince myself that culture is important, both anecdotally as well as evidentially. Some of that came from Richard and his books. Richard and I have a mutual friend that I introduced him to, Dwight Cooper, who has actually run one of the best places to work in America, according to, I think, Forbes.
Fortune, yeah,
Fortune or
magazine.
Forbes,
Yeah.
And it, for over a decade, I think his streak continues or something like that, where they were the #1 company to work for in their category or in their company size. I don't want to misquote Dwight and his great company, but I started just listening carefully to him and Richard. I read a book by Jeffrey J. Fox, How to Be a Great Boss. And I just became a sponge of learning as much as I can. And then I've always been the natural personality type of, every day I ask myself, what went well today? What went wrong? And how can I improve upon it? But then I also look at, I'm constantly looking and observing other leaders, whether they're my clients, my friends, my vendors, and I'm saying, what do they do well, right? And what could they be doing better? And I'll be honest, like anything in life, you learn more. I've learned more from the worst bosses that I've had, from them. And then I've learned a lot from the great bosses I've had, and I've tried to emulate the parts that work and the parts that I liked.
So we got a question here from the chat box. It says, Jason, do you use rituals to develop culture?
Yeah, we do a rain dance and kumbaya. I'm not really sure what that question means by rituals, but I'm going to guess what
Are there some kind of things that you do?
Like Walmart does. What does Walmart do? They have their
huddles.
Their huddles.
Yeah,
I think that's where the question is coming from.
And interesting, if the answer is yes, we do have some rituals. It'd be interesting to hear what those are in light of the fact that you're a mostly remote and virtual workforce at this point. But yeah, when I hear about cultural rituals, I generally, things that we kind of have fallen into that we do that help to bind us together.
Yeah. No, Jerry, I appreciate the question. I just I wanted to make a joke there about it. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day,
leave the jokes to us, would you please, Jason?
I will do that. All right, you know what? I have to go. I got another call coming in. So, let's see. Huddles, I think, are an evolution of a guy named Ivy Lee, who was one of the fathers of modern PR. And so he was hired by an organization, I think it was the Rockefeller, but I don't want to misquote that. And he was the guy, they hired him, and he came in and he gave them the advice of saying, write down the 3 to 5 must-dos that you have to do every day at the end of the day or the beginning of the day, and then keep working till you get those things done. And then you can do the other stuff. Then you can go home or whatever you need to get done. But these are the must-do commitments you're making to yourself and the organization you have to get done today. Well, he said, hey, there's my advice, take it or leave it. I'm paraphrasing here, of course, and just pay me what you think it's worth. And the legend goes that about a month later, he received a check for $60,000. Well, not only is that a lot of money today, but that was a whole lot of money 100 years ago, right? And so, so I'm proud to say he was a PR guy who came up with that advice. And I think today we've kind of pivoted where huddles, as we know them, and huddles that we do at our agency, there's a role for sharing that Ivy Lee method, as it's called. The things you've got to do today. That's the 3rd or 4th thing that we cover in our daily huddles here at Axia. So huddles are a key part. There's other kind of rituals that we can talk about. My friend Dwight Cooper, when he was first educating me about culture, I was talking about doing what he calls culture augmentation, like funny T-shirt day and stuff like that. And he's like, those are good things, and they're important to raise the bar and have fun at work, which we encourage. But there's more meaningful things you have to do too. So we try to find a nice balance of doing all those things. Going back to the question of remote, it's a lot easier when you're fully working in the office or you're fully working remote. We were dabbling in this middle ground for years, and it was really hard because there's things that your remote people can't do that they really want to do. And so you try to include them through Zoom even early on and being early adopters of Zoom. But then, you might have a brainstorming session or a collaboration meeting or a strategic planning meeting. And then all of us that are in person, we go to lunch together, and the people on Zoom are kind of left, holding the bag a little bit. So we adopted simple things like making sure they're all having food delivered so that they can be part of the meal, and maybe we stay together to do the meal. So it's really just, inclusion and thinking about how do you include people I used to be a little more rigid about it, like, hey, I'm really sorry, you know, and I probably wasn't as sincere about it, that you get to work from home and you don't have to come to an office, right? And we, you know, and you miss out on some conversations. But I don't think I was genuinely as empathetic about that as I should have been. Now that we're all working from home, it makes it super easy. And we try to make getting together in person geographically where we can the exception to the culture and team building activities, not the rule, not the norm, right?
Oh,
I'm gonna
great
jump
stuff.
in here.
Jason, we missed a question from our friend Steve here, who, back to your measurement surveying tools, is there an ideal time to survey your people, to measure workplace culture, and maybe how frequently you should do that? And I also wanted to circle back because I think it really is important for a lot of folks. Are there one or two really key indicators in those surveys that you find are particularly important, that are particularly important in identifying red flags or green flags for how your work is going?
Yeah, there definitely are key questions that are asked, including, you know, how likely are you to continue working with this company next year? How long do you see yourself working at the company? I don't want to misquote the questions, but there are certainly some high level pointers that I started looking closer at year over year. How likely, you know, the old net promoter score, how likely are you to refer a friend or family member to come work for this company? But then going back to the ideal timing, you know, that's interesting. I like it, you know, if you want real feedback, you don't want to ask it on a day where everybody just got bonuses, you know, or anything like that, right? You don't want to ask it on the day that, you know, I mean, I know people who do this, especially like for we talked about the American City business journals and the local business journals, you know, oh, we're about to do a survey of all our employees to see if we're a best place to work. Let's make sure we throw a huge party. Let's make sure we give everybody, you know, their annual raises the week before that and stuff. So you could really manipulate that stuff. And thankfully, this American City business journals has really kind of cracked down on that, because I know some companies used to selectively send it to like just the people they know that are real happy and stuff like that. And, you know, you certainly don't want to do that. I think at the end of the day, to your point, candor is really good. So timing, I would think about the timing, but I would make sure you're not creating timing that works to your benefit, kind of thing. I certainly wouldn't do it the day after you announce layoffs. But, you know, think through when is you know, the most authentic time you might be able to get fair and balanced feedback.
Jason, you bring up a good point about transparency. I'm curious, in your culture, how transparent is leadership to frontline? Numbers, state of affairs, things like that.
I think it's very important, obviously. I mean, you know, the more disconnected, you know, the leadership team is from the people in the trenches, if you will, the more disingenuous I think they come across. You know, I heard a great quote from an industry leader who's no longer with us named Tony Mikas, and he shared with me a story about Walt Disney. Walt Disney was giving a tour of students who were on a field trip. And, you know, they're taking department to department, animation, sound, you know, engineering. I don't recall, drawing, etc. And so finally said, hey, Mr. Disney, you took us here, 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 and here, but what do you do? You know, like, what's your job here? And, you know, Walt Disney, being the creative genius he was, he said, my job is to go around from each of those departments like a bee and pollinate a little while here, pollinate a little bit here, and pollinate a little bit there. That really stuck with me in a big way. And I've always tried to kind of run my business that way. So just earlier, before we got on this, I was spending a lot of time with our social media team, listening to their problems, their frustrations, also hearing kind of what they're working on, and just offering advice, candidly, kind of unsolicited advice. But, you know, asking them questions and seeing what their pain points are and trying to help them kind of diagnose. And, you know, one of our core values is improvement. So we're always, you know, really seeking to improve. Another thing, early in my career, I was fortunate to have a management position at a company. It was a tech startup and we were very lean, and just through a series of things, I got promoted, and suddenly I had like 20 people working for me in a 24-hour environment. And I just found showing up on the shifts that I normally wouldn't be expected to be there made a big difference. Spending time in the trenches with them, you know, the 80s cliche, I think it is, walking around by managing by walking around, right? I'd never heard that before, but I just felt instinctually like that was the right thing to do. And people cared that I was spending time in the call center, right? Even though, you know, they were arguably the most entry-level people in our company, they were often the most important people. And so I just borrowed from smarter people than I, and, our receptionist became the director of first impressions, right? And just little things like that. They might sound gimmicky, but they mean a lot to the people who are in those roles.
Got another question here from the chat from Margarita. It says, sorry, I don't believe in awards. Can you convince me they're important for the organization?
Well, that sounds like maybe a longer topic, but because I respect what Margarita might be saying here, and I'm not sure if awards, we mean like giving awards to the employees, giving recognition awards, whether they're compensation or other awards, or maybe what we do as a PR agency, which is helping companies win awards. But at the end of the day, there are some people who do believe in awards, and I think we have to kind of think about that. I'm a little jaded or cynical about awards myself, but I think there are other people who have different motivations and are motivated by different things. One example of that is we've done, and I see Margarita followed up, but I think this is important to note. We do personality assessments. That was part of our awakening of the importance of culture, if I can mention that. And we have a great employee. She's been with us for more than a decade. She's fabulous. Well, I always made a point to publicly recognize her and her hard work, because she's very hardworking at the company. Well, then we came back and we did these personality assessments, and the coach said to me, whatever you do with this employee, don't recognize her publicly. That will drive her crazy. She'll hate it. She might even quit working here because of that. So I hope you never do that. And I was like, I almost do that I do it every week, maybe even every day. And she goes, that really is uncomfortable for her. And so I went to her and I just said, hey, I heard this. Is that true? And she paused, because one, she didn't like me knowing this much about her, right? Number one. But number two, she said, yes. In fact, sometimes I go in my office and I cry and I call my husband because I'm embarrassed by it. And, it's really, it's not what I want, but I didn't know how to tell you. And I was like, you cry? We caused you to, this is the exact opposite experience that we wanted to have. So I think it's about inclusion and, diversity, and thinking about different people have different personality types. They're motivated by different ways. That's one of the coolest things about personality assessments, is it helps you understand how and why these people are motivated, right? And how and why you want to communicate with them a certain way. And my communication style and my personality style and my work style are completely different than almost everybody at our organization. So I feel like, as the leader, I have to pivot and also show grace. And I ask them to also show grace to me. So stealing from our friend Dwight Cooper, we used to put little plaques on our doors when we met when we had physical offices. And mine would say, Jason needs quiet time to be able to do his work, and quiet time to be able to think. And we did that for other people who had different motivators. I had people in the company who could talk while they're working and maintain a conversation. I couldn't do that. They might be in my office and we're working on something, and I say, okay, I need a moment of silence so I can, work on this and then show you what I worked on. And they say, okay, cool. What are you doing this weekend, Jason? And I'm like, didn't you just hear me say I need some silence to be able to type this up and then we can collaborate? Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, okay. Hey, do you think we'll be done meeting by I have this appointment, and then what, are you going to the gym? They just start talking to me.
They just keep going on that way.
But that's their style, totally not my style.
Yeah. Let me just respond a little bit, I think, to what Margarita is saying, and about the best place to work example. I do hear people say, is that kind of thing real? I have also heard from people who work for companies that have won some of these awards, saying that sometimes competition can be a motivator, and that their performance is actually better because of the competition, whether you pay a lot of attention to the actual accolade or not. I think sometimes striving for that makes a company a better company. But it also explains why Southwest Airlines, which is known anecdotally, it has been for a long time, as one of the best places to work in America, has never participated in Fortune's program because of that very reason. So there are a lot of different views on that.
Yeah.
On that same thing.
I
got a question, but you go ahead, Jeff.
No, go ahead.
Jeff, you go ahead. No, you.
Mine is a very selfish one. So go ahead. Okay, I'm going to ask.
Margarita, thank you for your question,
Jason. I shared with you my expertise is in the area of customer experience. And I'm curious, at Axia, how do you think your culture affects the customer experience, the external customer experience?
I know it's incredibly important incredibly important and very, very much related. So, I early on in my culture journey, one of the first things that was a revelation to me and very key to me is that, if your employees are not happy at work, how do you expect they're going to deliver a first-class experience to your clients? I mean, to me, it's a great question. I think a very simple answer, but it's more complex to make that a reality, of course. But I think we've all experienced, especially recently, where employees are understaffed and they don't feel valued at restaurants and retail environments, and they could candidly just, care less. And, we want our employees to care. In order for that to happen, we've got to care about our employees. And, my friend John Thedford is in the retail space, and he's got like a little diagram he created. It's basically a triangle, and you've got shareholders, employees, and customers. And if you're taking care of the employees, they're going to take care of the customers. Your shareholders are going to be happy. It just so happens that he wrote a book on that as a leader, but I also know there's a guy in this same thing that wrote a book about that named Richard, right?
I've heard there is a connection between people
Holy cow,
and
tell us
profit
about that.
performance. Yes.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, just again, talking about the culture there at Axia, one of the things that you've said is we don't have set work hours, just take care of your clients and have fun doing it. What's the philosophy behind that? Some people would say that wouldn't work for us, and other people say, obviously, that it does. So tell us your experience with that.
Yeah, my biggest concern about that, honestly, is making sure people have work-life balance and they know how and when to disconnect, and that they feel empowered to do that. We're in the, we employ, as I think Richard Florida calls, the creative class, right? So we're employing the creative class at our agency. And so there's some people who aren't as creative at certain hours or aren't as motivated at certain hours. So, kind of unofficially, I'll share that, members of our web team tend to show up at a lot different time than members of our client-facing team. I've always had the philosophy, just like, I'm an entrepreneur. I want to create an entrepreneurial experience for my employees without the risk of being an entrepreneur. And so, I often tell them, hey, work your best hours at the hours that are best for you. And we'll figure out the rest later. And if it becomes a problem, we can have a conversation about it. But, we're hiring people to perform. And I think putting restraints onto them of when and how they can perform those things are not for the best employment experience.
It all comes down to trust, right?
Exactly.
It's also the idea of, dictate the outcome, not the process. Because although it may work for you and this is the process you use, great, it may not work for me. So why are you pushing it on me and handcuffing me?
And to your point, that's how we've been able to attract some of the most talented people in the business from all over the United States. And so we had one thing that started this journey for us is we're based in the Jacksonville metro market, as Richard mentioned, and it's a big Navy town. So we'd get a lot of military spouses who would come in and they'd work for us for 2 or 3 years, and then their spouse would get transferred somewhere else. And very quickly, I realized these are really good workers. And as I got to know them, I realized I uncovered there's a real challenge for them getting hired as they move around, because people don't want to hire them because they're military. So they spend 6 months waiting to find a job, but that's 6 months less they're going to be in that marketplace. So the good ones
2 years later after that.
Yeah, exactly. So the good ones, which was most of them for us, we would pull them aside and just say, hey, whenever you get, transferred somewhere, you're going to have a job here. We'll work with you. We'll work around your schedule. That only became difficult once when someone got, transferred to Hawaii, but we worked with that and they worked with that. And there were some compromises that had to be made because that's a significant time zone difference to maintain the normal business hours of most of our clients. But we made it work. In fact, we attracted some opportunities in Hawaii because of it.
So, Jason, you've mentioned attracting people and hiring people. How much emphasis do you place on your culture when you hire people? And are there certain things that you look for in your hiring process or do that's perhaps a little different in terms of how you hire folks?
Yeah, so we have a 10-step hiring process. We've adopted that a lot of implementing the things we talked about, like personality assessments. And the book is escaping me right now, but there's a great book about hiring that you guys probably know about. I can't think of the name of it, It's distracting me at this point, but you know, where you tell the person you're going to check their references, you tell them that throughout their interviewing process, and then you actually ask them to have those references contact you. Whatever that process is, there's a great book, Top Grading. Thank you for the help on that, guys. Appreciate it. But yeah, we followed Top Grading. So we've got a 10-step process. And the one thing we learned, you know, recently and in different seasons in the hiring cycle is we've got to speed that up. You know, we used to, you know, the cliche, I didn't know this, the cliche hire slow, fire quick has a double meaning, right? So you want to look at candidates and hire slow, fire quick if they don't work out. But then as you're running a business and the economic seasons are changing, you need to hire slow and fire quick, you know, as in layoffs and things like that, if you're going to do those things. But yeah, I hope that answered your question. I'm happy for a follow-up. Natasha, I love the quote you put in the chat, by the way. I think everybody should make a note of that.
Yeah. Well, for the naysayers who might say, oh, this, you know, kind of just do your own thing, work whenever you want, just get the job done. You also say that you only hire superstars, and I love something that you said. Yes, you are. You said everyone has a number, a daily, weekly, monthly, and quarterly KPI. So you're very performance oriented. You're very performance driven, but at the same time, you're saying do it on your own terms. And if the performance doesn't come about, then we'll have to have a conversation about it. But as long as it does, we don't care when.
How do you deal with people?
Friends of mine own an agency that they're focused on the results only work environment, you know, movement. And I've never read the book, but everything they tell me about, I'm like, we're already doing that, you know, and I'm sure it's a great book. But the one thing I love, they shared about their culture. One thing they said that I loved is like, there were two business partners there and one had a hard time. Like, well, where's Sally? Why isn't she at work yet? It's 9:30, you know, why isn't she at work? And the other partner would always say, is there a problem? Do you need something from Sally that you're not getting? And that helped the other partner realize that she was just, you know, being a rule follower, that you got to be here by a certain time. And like, if Sally's not doing her work, let's talk about it, or let's talk about it with Sally. But otherwise, Sally's a great worker. So why are we worried that she's not here unless we're worried about her wellness? And so we used to have a policy. If you're not here by 9:30, just let somebody know. So we're not worried about you, but we're not going to stress over the fact you're not here. Unless, of course, you were supposed to be at a 9:15 meeting, then that's another story, right? Sanjay,
Oh, sorry, Sanjay, go ahead. You wanted to.
I was going to say, again, some of the other things you're doing is you give, you know, unlimited PTO time and you give these holidays and all that. There's a cost to these things. What do you say to the naysayers that go, hold on, there's a big financial investment here. Are you getting are you getting return on your investment?
Yeah, so I was waiting for somebody to hit me with the knockout punch of, wait a minute, you work your own hours and you give unlimited PTO? That doesn't sound very real to me at all. And we gave, before we went to unlimited PTO, we already had generous PTO and 10 holidays a year, which is more than most companies that I know of. So to answer your question, you know, we're in the PR business. And PS, for those that are listening, we are hiring, so please spread the news. I could use 3 people today, just a heads up. And even my wife has said, gosh, you guys must need some people because I've been working so much. But
I think anyway, one of your criteria was no jerks allowed. So
that's right. Yeah.
I was going to ask about that question. Yeah.
Michael wrote the book on it, but
sorry, Mike.
Yeah,
I'm the only jerk allowed at this point. So anyway, back to your question. So yeah, it does have a cost, but the cost is the people, meaning the investment is in the people. And let me just say that, you know, they love having that autonomy and that flexibility, that trust from leadership. By the way, if you don't trust your employees and you expect them to trust you, that's not always going to work, right? And so, yeah, there probably is a cost. My friends that are in my, what do you call it, peer group or mastermind group, you know, they joke, I want to come work for you. Goodness gracious, Jason. But, you know, our margins last year.
That's a phrase we use in the South, by the way, my friends. Goodness gracious. I understood it perfectly.
So anyway, you know, what was I going to say?
We're talking about margins. I want to hear that.
Yeah. So last year we had our best margins ever in company history. And I'm proud to say that I also sense that we're also increasing what we're able to pay our people at the same time. We rolled out a profit sharing program a couple years ago where we share 20% of our profits every month with our employees. And that's a big motivator too. So at the end of the day, you know, I don't think people ask me, and we can talk about this more, how did you go 63 months with 0 turnover? A lot of it is autonomy. A lot of it is respect. You know, a lot of it is just hire, like I said, like we say on the website, hire smart people and get out of their way and don't micromanage them. I personally have a rule. One of my core values is 0 tolerance for micromanagement. And if I'm micromanaging you or you're micromanaging me, one of us or both of us are probably not doing pulling our weight.
Yeah.
You also mentioned, Jason, we haven't talked about this yet, in the cheat notes of all the perks that you offer. You said when people are physically in an office, you offer soft toilet paper. So, you know, those little things that make a difference, right?
Jason, one of the things you said, oh, sorry.
I stole that from Peter Shankman, by the way, just for full disclosure.
Good segue.
He had a great blog post about this, and then I went to link to it and it was gone, or a video or something, and he said he would work on getting that back live, but Peter is such a busy guy. I don't know that he's done that yet. I followed up with him a couple times.
You know, that's a good segue, because offline, before the show today, when we were talking, and you just said it again, you stole something from somebody else. And I want to say, in all seriousness, I want people to know that this is not things that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You know, find what works for your organization, right? And so I'm curious how that's developed, that research and development. We won't call it stealing.
We call it borrowing.
Okay.
So, but borrowing with credit and sometimes borrowing with permission is even better. But you notice when I borrowed things, I pointed back to who the source was, right?
Sure.
So, you know, I mentioned John Thedford. He wrote a great book, and I really like it. But you know what I loved about the book is I can give it to somebody and say, if you want to understand 80% of what we think about culture, you could read one book, or how to have a great culture. You could read this one book, in addition to Richard's and others, of course, but his book does a great job of summarizing in one book what took me 10 years to learn through reading hundreds of books, right?
What's the book again, Jason?
Yeah, Smart Moves, or something about profit. The title escapes me in the moment, but John Thedford.
John Thedford.
Yeah, and he's in the retail industry.
Okay.
So yeah, and just let's see, real quick to Natasha's point about, on the comments about fun, positive culture initiatives can be done very economically. You know what? That's where we started as a startup business. I read what these best places to work locally and nationally were getting recognized for. And one Fortune 500 company in our marketplace, they had a post office in their lobby so employees could do their mailing and their shippings and all that stuff without having to leave work or stress about being late to work. They could do it all in the building. And I said, you know what? We're way too small to have a post office. Here's a whole bunch of stamps, right? You guys can mail your stuff. This was before stamps were like $5 a piece or whatever they are now. But we used to just put them in the workroom and say, hey, we bought a bunch of stamps. When these run out, we may or may not buy more, right? So people had some idea of guidance or whatever. Now, if they had a package that was going to be, you know, $50, I'm like, let's put it on FedEx or let's put it on UPS or something.
Right.
My point is we scaled back this big idea that a Fortune 500 company could afford to do for thousands of employees. And I said, how can we make this reasonable
for a small
business like ours?
I love coloring outside the lines.
Yes. Wow. In the last minute that we have here,
I would say FedEx over UPS, but that's just
Amen.
there's a story behind that. Listen, Jason, in the last minute that we have here, there
We're out
are
of time already?
more than 4 speakers on this on the screen today, because you too are a professional speaker. Tell us very quickly a little bit about what you speak about when you're speaking for an audience.
Sure, and Michael's right. It's called Smart Moves by John Thedford. What I speak about is currently public relations. I speak on PR topics, including yes, PR is measurable. Currently working on a new one, which is more about, you know, kind of, and it's still evolving, but kind of, you know, the modern PR industry started out as a train wreck, and some might say it's still a train wreck, and here are ways we can improve it. And it's kind of a blend of modern PR, or, you know, traditional PR doesn't work anymore, and here are ways you can improve it.
Great. And we put I'm going to put your website in the chat. It is axiapr.com, correct?
That's right. Yes.
Okay, there it is. So you can visit Jason's website. Everybody in the chat is saying this has been a great show, and I certainly agree with that 100%. So as we wrap up, any final comments from anyone?
Just want to mention, and I mention at every show, that truly we are available for weddings and bar mitzvahs, and but in all seriousness, for all corporate events, the 4 of us would love to be part of your corporate event and make a lot of fun. We can even bring in
Jeff Goldblum.
That's right. Bring in Jeff Goldblum.
we can facilitate a conversation around culture in your organization.
Exactly, with your CEO.
That's what Jeff's trying to
and
say.
everyone.
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time, and I speak for a living. So
I want to
Jason,
thank
thank
Stephen
you
for putting in
very
the
much.
exact title of that book I mentioned, Smart Moves Management, Cultivating World-Class People and Profits.
We can always count
Right
on
on.
Stephen to help us out when we don't quite have it. Right? Right.
yeah,
Jason, thank you very much.
My pleasure. I'm
Sincerely,
glad
my
to be
friend.
here.
This has
Yeah.
been this has just been amazing, and lots of great comments and accolades from our audience as well. So thank you, everyone. And as we always say, see you every other Wednesday.
Every other Wednesday.
guys.
Thank you all. Thank you, Jason.
thanks,
My
Jason.
pleasure. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Make good life choices, everyone.
That's right. Don't forget to be awesome.
Not my
Bye.
point.